Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to a sort of teaser, I guess. Today I'm going to be talking about various historical odds and ends that I encounter while I'm reading both for pleasure and to, help me make up stories. Shindo Renmei, McNamara's Morons, and of course, the last thing doesn't really have to do with history. It's just up there on my whiteboard, Psychology, Sociology, Structure, Speculation, where I'll be doing a brief, super informal discussion of the validity of psychology and sociology as sciences. So, let's go ahead and start with the Shindo Renmei. Of course, one of my biggest stories that I'm working on is the sketch of Sam Monroe, which takes place in Brazil. So, naturally, my search history is full of stuff about Brazil, and as such, I run across articles that have to do with Brazil. Now, the Shindo Renmei, that doesn't sound very Brazilian, doesn't it? That sounds super Japanese, because it is. The Shindo Renmei were basically, let me see if I'm saying that correctly. Yep, Renmei. Probably not the right pronunciation, but for some reason I thought I saw it spelled Ryan May. But Shindo Renmei were an organization formed out of the immigrant community, Japanese, not expatriates, but I guess migrants. I'm not sure what the status of expatriate versus just immigrant is. Anyway, they were basically people who thought that the news of the end of the war was, well, American propaganda, World War II, the war I'm talking about, and they went and killed people, other Japanese citizens who they viewed as having, dishonored the emperor and Japan by accepting the news of the defeat. So, right now I am on an article. It's actually by a man named Katsuo Higuchi, whose background snippet I'm going to read here. A Nisei native of Tupa, Sao Paulo state, he holds a law degree specializing in labor relations. Over the course of 50 years, he worked as an executive and entrepreneur in the human resources field. A business consultant, he's also columnist for the newspaper Nippo Brazil. So what seems to have happened is, like, right around before the war, World War II started, Japan was kind of having economic issues, and like, Irish immigrants and other such people that came to the United States, the Japanese saw this big expanse of land and wanted to go down there to make their fortune. Now, when they got there, what they were surprised by is just land stretching further than the eye could see. Japan is an island nation, and Brazil obviously isn't. And there was no infrastructure there. Everybody obviously had a very, very different culture, very, very different language and customs. And the Japanese formed kind of a super insular community. And yeah, eventually, let me go ahead and go down here and read about the actual Shindo Renmei emerging. So, Shindo Renmei emerges. It was in this context that emerged Junji, the context of, the Japanese being there in these insular communities. Yeah. It was in this context that emerged Junji Kikawa. I'm sorry for my Japanese, I really am. A 67-year-old former Japanese Imperial Army colonel who lived in the upper Paulista region, a railroad center stretch in northwestern Sao Paulo state. In August 1942, as a consequence of a violent confrontation between Brazilians and Japanese nationals in the town of Marília, Sao Paulo, he founded an organization named Shindo Renmei, in Japanese, the League of the Subject's Path, a nationalist group aiming to unify the Japanese colony around the Yamato Damashi, the Japanese warrior spirit. The organization began by handing out leaflets that filled their compatriots with the hope of victory while encouraging their belief in the eventual success of their side in the war. Supporting even acts of terrorism and sabotage, the leaflets recommended discontinuing the production of silk and mint. Then, in the hands of the Japanese-Brazilian producers, warning that such activities helped the U.S. in the manufacture of parachutes, silk, and nitroglycerin, minted menthol. But it was only after Japan surrendered on August 13, 1945, that Shindo Renmei showed its true terrorist and bloodthirsty face. With the end of the war, many Shindo Renmei members refused to believe the official reports about Japan's defeat. From then on, their objectives would focus on punishing defeatists disseminating the truth that Japan had won the war and defending the emperor's honor. So, this fellow right here, Katsuo Higuchi, is descended from one of the victims of their murder spree. And I found that very interesting because I did not know that there was a sizable population of Japanese people in Brazil. And it's unfortunate that the context in which I have to deliver this information is a story of tragedy, but it's what I came across, and I thought that it's not commonly known, so I should share it. Now, another thing that's probably a little bit more commonly known because a big thing to the story in it, although that's not where I saw it as. I look up stuff on Robert McNamara, who I think was like a defense, security of defense or something. But anyway, he was up in the United States government and had a lot to do with the Vietnam War. I think his sons or somebody worked for the Ford company, just a kind of a very big mover and shaker in the United States, who eventually recanted his views of the domino theory of warfare, where we can prevent all kinds of chains of events with military action, such as Vietnam, stopping the spread of communism, or whatever it was. Now, basically what happened during Vietnam is they were not able to get all the soldiers that they wanted because it was, among the youth, a very unpopular war. And, you know, if you drafted college-aged men, it would cause, men who were in college, it would cause kind of a public outcry. If you, you just had to be very careful about how you went around taking troops. And because the war was so bloody and required so much manpower, eventually they had to lower the standards really drastically. The assessment test that the military gave, which I think now is called the ASVAB, but back then was called, or might still be called, I don't know, the Armed Forces Qualification Test. Yeah, they scored lower than would make them eligible for duty, and as a result, lots and lots of them died and caused other people to die. Now, the stated reason behind this move, the kind of PR polish, was, well, we're giving this man an opportunity to get out of poverty. But really, it's because that was the easiest pool of people to kind of bring in to the war without causing too much of a hubbub. Very Machiavellian and scheming. McNamara wasn't that great of a dude. Now, you can't necessarily like moralize too much, because I think that he served in World War II, or was at least like of age around the period. So he really wanted to prevent things from getting out of hand, and I guess he decided to do all this crazy shit. And it's just it's awful. But it's history, and you should know about it. So obviously this is a very informal. I'm probably going to do on the Fractal Journal YouTube channel something a little bit more in depth, time permitted, but I wanted to get y'all acquainted with these little stories. Now, to move on to psych and sociology, which I have a subsection subtitled Structured Speculation. The thing about science is, when it's a hard science, you need to be able to repeat experiments. You need to, and that's most easily done with a certain kind of class of physical phenomenon, chemical and physical as in physics. Other than that, well, also biological. You can observe germs and things, and protein chains, etc. But other than that, and even within that, the frameworks to explain that stuff, it becomes very sort of philosophical. Now philosophy has a certain rigor about it, and when that rigor is kind of forced into the mold of reality as best as it can be, that's when you produce something like physics or chemistry or computer science. But You see, there's not really, with mental processes, especially with the variability we see in populations and individuals, that becomes very, very difficult. And the reason I'm even like broaching this subject, that people probably already kind of either intuitively know or have already heard and read about, is psychology has a lot of power in today's world. And I think it's entirely unjustified. It makes a lot of claims about etiology, about the origin of diseases. I think, over psychiatry, overdiagnoses things, and has a lot of ties to the pharmaceutical industry. I'm not saying that psychology is useless. I'm not even really saying that psychology isn't a science, because I think that while we should kind of have a special place for science, of us being as rigorous as possible, it is a focused study, but it's a focused study that at this point in history is more on the side of structured speculation than it is of being a hard science. And that's why when you are making decisions about people's lives, about what they put into their bodies, about populations and the policies towards those populations, you should really do so very, very carefully, because you are not standing on as firm ground as your training and as public perception suggests. So, thanks so much for stopping by with what I was able to put up today in terms of content. I hope you enjoyed it, found it informative, although it's a little dry, a little just kind of like spat on out there. But like I said, I will try to kind of polish it up on this same subject matter, give you a little bit more detail on my other channel. Thanks so much for listening. Check out www.fractaljournal.com for stories, ideas, and more. And cheers, folks.